That first leg or a colonoscopy?
Go on.
Come on, gotta answer.
Well, I'm not that familiar with the second, so I'll stick with the first leg.
Fair enough.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Lionheart Radio. I'm your host, Rick Alexander, founder of Lou Aviv in San Diego, California. And today I'm going to do a little bit of a race recap for you. For you OG Lionheart Radio listeners, you know, on episode 4 or 5 was the last time I did a race recap. I've actually run 9 or 10 ultramarathons since then, but those were really all in preparation for this big one that I just did this past weekend. And so for you guys that do remember that episode, on the first time I tried to run a 100-miler, it did not go well at all. I tried to run it without training, which was stupid. I think you can definitely do it, but I couldn't on that day, and it hurt, and I paid for it, and I don't ever want to go back to that place again. For those of you that remember, I got pulled off at mile 70 because I didn't make the time cutoff in that race. Just for perspective, I hit the first 100 miles in this new race. In the Tahoe 200, I hit the first 100 miles in 35 hours, and there was about 20,000 feet of elevation gain loss, more than in that first race. And I think that I did so much better in this race than that race, obviously because of fitness. I trained a lot, but then a lot of it was just institutional knowledge and knowing how to handle my body when things go wrong, how to handle the technical side of it, what equipment to wear, what shoes to wear, and then what to do at aid stations, and then also how to manage the mind, which I'm really excited to get into because that played a huge part in how well I did or didn't do, depending on who you are. But for me, I did well. I finished, which was the goal of a 205-mile race around Lake Tahoe with 80,000 feet of elevation gain loss, and the whole entire race took place from about 6,000 feet to 9,500 feet, 9,600 feet. And that altitude actually played a huge role in my performance, and not a good one at all. So for those of you watching this, you can also check out the audio version on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, SoundCloud, or basically anywhere else that podcasts are found. And so starting from the beginning, I went to Lake Tahoe early in order to camp and sleep at altitude and do some hiking. I researched a lot of different ways to get acclimated faster. Of course, there are some supplements that work as well. Viagra is one of the supplements that work. L-arginine is one of the supplements that work. Anything that's going to cause that vasodilation and allow you to get more blood to your muscles, it's going to cause more oxygen, obviously, to be able to be brought to your different muscles in the different areas of your body that will need it and will be starving from it at a higher altitude. So I went there a week early we did some mountain biking, we did some hiking. I got to check out some of the course. We did like 20 miles of the course, and I thought it was very beneficial. I felt more acclimated, but as the race went on, it turned out that it didn't really matter. I ended up getting caught pretty hard from the elevation. So the race started on Friday at 9 a.m. and it started with a long, like 5-6 mile uphill slog straight up into a ridge line and then back down into the first aid station. A lot of people went out of the gate really hard. I was getting passed left and right. And at the beginning of my ultramarathon career, that would have gotten me, and I would have really like pushed hard in order to be at the beginning or the front of the pack. But since I've done a few, I've realized that very few people can hold the pace that they start at for 200 miles. And it becomes so important in a race that's this long where you're out there for days, where there's so much time for things to go wrong that you have to stick to your plan as long as possible. And like Mike Tyson says, you know, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. But if you can prolong getting punched in the face for as long as you possibly can, that's going to be a lot better off. You want to stay as comfortable as you can for as long as you can. And that's not unlike any other competition. You know, my first like 3 or 4 CrossFit competitions, I came out of the gate super hard, redlined within 2 minutes, and then the rest of the workout felt like an eternity. But you can get away with it in CrossFit because that's, you're looking at a 15, 30, 45-minute workout probably max. When you're talking about 4 days in the mountains, if you redline on that first climb, you're done. That's it. It's over. Like, you're done. You're not going to make it. it's just too long to go, and it's just you got to manage your highs and your lows. And if you start off by not managing that first high by going too hard, it's going to put you in the hurt locker. So I did a good job at sticking to my game plan. I actually stuck to my exact pace I wanted, even a little bit ahead of pace, but still comfortable for the first 103 miles, which was pretty huge. So that first day, we got some hail and thunderstorms, and this race actually had a lower finish rate than I guess most of the other ones have had that Destination Trail Running has put on, especially the 200. I think the 200 series, I think that 66% of the people that started finished. But I saw a lot of people fall out early, and I think it's because of that bad weather early. It started getting in people's heads. Even for a fleeting thought, I had that moment where it was hailing and thunderstorm, and the temperature drops quick, especially in the mountains. The temperature will drop 30 degrees within 5 minutes, and especially at that altitude. And the sun was going down, and I got cold, and there was a minute where I was like, oh God, I'm only 40 miles into this thing, and I have 44 miles into this thing, and I have days. I have over 160 miles left to go. And I had to get out of that headspace super fast because I know if you start looking for a reason to quit, you'll find it in an ultra for sure. So don't even look, and you'll be okay. But you have to really manage your headspace. And I saw a lot of people get caught up by that early. Going into the first night, up until mile 62, which we finished at 4 a.m. of that first day. Again, it's really slow because you have so long to go. So obviously it's much slower than any other 100K that I've done, but by design. In that first 60 miles, you really wind out to what they call the wild side. And in that area, you're very far from civilization. You don't have cell phone reception. So I ended up sticking with 2 people throughout that entire night. And that was actually really beneficial. We kind of watched out for each other, kept each other going, and everybody hits highs and lows at different times. So when you have somebody that you can run with, especially in something that long, it definitely helps to make sure that your pace doesn't fall off too hard. And the other thing that's really cool is, I started that night out. It was myself, right? So I'm in the military, supplement company owner, podcast host. That's kind of the things I go by. And the other people, we had a guy that worked in the oil industry who was 55 years old doing his last ultra. Had a 57-year-old lady, woman that was a stud, and she ran, she's done all of them, UTMB, Hard Rock, Western States, Leadville, just a who's who of ultra marathons. She had done them all, so vastly more experience than I had. And then another lady that unfortunately didn't make it through, but was a retired school teacher from Canada. And so it was just really cool that you get this eclectic, these eclectic brands of human beings, right? And we're all in it together. And we're all kind of suffering together, and it really makes for a really cool story. And it helps pass the time because you're meeting these people and you're finding out about their lives. And there's something about shared suffering that just makes it a really great experience. And so we stuck together for that first night going into mile 62. And I felt really good when I got to the 62 aid station where my girlfriend and my crew were waiting for me. I tried to sleep there. I wasn't going to sleep at first, and everyone told me, if you head out of here without sleeping, you'll feel fine, and then you're going to really unravel as the day goes on. So I tried to sleep for an hour. I didn't fall asleep, but I think just getting off my feet and the rest helped a lot. And then I got changed, and I headed into the next day. So the next day was all uphill. There was a little 8-mile segment to mile 70. That was good because I got to mile 70, ate some breakfast around 7 a.m., ate pancakes and burritos and everything great that I could stuff in my mouth. And then from mile 70 to 90, fucking straight up climbed. Just kept going. And then you got up to I think it was the mile 88 aid station. But you got 2 miles away after climbing all day, and then you drop a mile or 2 down to the aid station because then you had to climb all the way back up again out of that hole, and it just made for a whole day of climbing, which sucked. But it sucked more for me because it was at altitude, and around mile 75 or 80, my lungs started filling up with fluid. I got HAPE, high altitude pulmonary edema, and it sucked so bad. And for anyone that knows anything or is familiar with HAPE, the only thing you can really do is get down at altitude. So every time I was going into another aid station from then on, I would have to look at what the altitude was, and then I would have to look at the next one, because I was like, if it's high, no matter how bad I want to sleep, I have to get the hell out of here, because I didn't want my race to stop early. And obviously with that fluid in your lungs, you can get infected, and all these different things can happen. And it's not good. And I heard of a lot of people in the race, or some people actually going to get it checked out at the hospital and getting pulled, and that is probably the prudent thing to do. But I had just worked so hard to get to that moment that I was like, I think I can manage it and use what medical knowledge I have in order to be relatively safe. And I think that I did that effectively. But as my lungs filled up with fluid, I realized I was operating on like 10% lung capacity. So it was like having my normal body, but Simon Birch with Simon Birch lungs. And then so I couldn't breathe. And every time I tried to go hard, I would have to stop every 5 or 10 feet in order to just catch my breath. And that happened over and over and over until finally I just decided, like, okay, I have to slow down. I'm not going to be able to keep my pace anymore. At that point, I was so far ahead of my pace that I still technically would kept my pace up through 120 miles. But I had to slow down. There was nothing I could do about it, because every time I would try to go fast, I just could get no oxygen. I could get no oxygen to my brain. So I started seeing stars, and it really sucked. And then, so I had to manage that point. And this is where something that I think comes in really handy. I read a book recently, and I've been experimenting with whether what you feed your mind with right prior to something really difficult matters. And it might seem like, oh, okay, yeah, it definitely does matter. That seems like a stupid thing to measure. But for me, I read a book, Homo Deus. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that. It's a great book, but it's a little bit bleak. I've always, this is a weird thing, but I've always believed in a God. And then after I read that book, I'm like, oh man, that's a good argument for why there might not be a God, right? But it got me turning in all these different ways, and it started making me think that, like, well, you start thinking, like, what the fuck is the point of all this? What's the point of life? And it's a weird, like, downward spiral. And I was talking to one of my buddies who's a devout atheist after reading that book, and he was like, yeah, I would just caution you to be careful on the route that you're going down and what you believe, because I don't wish believing nothing on anybody. And that's a whole really deep argument that I don't want to get into too much here, but it definitely, it played a role, because I had a 50 miler right after that while I was having those thoughts. And I swear to God, it was the worst 50 miler of my entire life. And it was raining, and it was dark and cold, and that's one thing, but it just was so hard for me to get out of a good mental space. So this time I really wanted to experiment. So I started reading that book, You Are a Badass. It's kind of a chick book, kind of a self-help chick book. But it was all that I had with me at the time. My girlfriend had it. So I just started reading it to try to, like, feed my mind these other positive thoughts. And there's a part in the book where she talks about taking a bad scenario and then saying this is good because, and then filling in whatever that is. So, if something happens that's bad, you say, well, this is good because, and then find a reason that bad thing is actually good. And it will help you stay in a more mentally positive mind state, right? Makes sense. It was super fucking important. I cannot describe how important that really was for me. When I got high altitude pulmonary edema, my pace had to slow so much. Life was really hard. I could not breathe at all. I couldn't even focus on anything else hurting because I could barely breathe every step of the way. And all I kept thinking is, this is good because it's forcing me to slow down. It's forcing me to save my legs and my feet. And whenever it does clear up, I'm going to have those things. As opposed to if I didn't get edema in my lungs, I would have been able to push really hard to mile 103, and I still would have had 102 miles to go. And who knows how that would have gone out. But I do know that by slowing down, I'm not using my legs nearly as much as I would had I be pushing on these mountains. And so that was the counterfact that I told myself. A counterfact is when you get into a scenario and you immediately decide all the other things that could have happened and whether those are positive or good, right? So if a robber goes into a bank and a crowded bank of 50 people and you're in there and he fires one shot and that shot hits you in the arm, whether you think that's a positive or a negative experience is based on the counterfact that you tell yourself. So a lot of people, especially if you're pessimistic or prone to negative thought patterns, will say, this is bullshit. I could have been in any bank. It could have hit anybody. I happen to be the person that got shot. Somebody that creates a positive counterfact in their mind would think, how lucky am I that I could have got shot in the head or in the lung, and instead I took it in the arm, and I'm going to be okay. And so that's a really crazy thing to start thinking about, but I wanted to bring it up because it played such a big role in my ability to get through this race. So creating that positive counterfact and then using the "this is good because" statement kept me in such a good mental space. And truly, I think when you look for these things in earnest, you realize, okay, this is actually good because I actually did save my legs. All right, so getting into mile 103, I was really happy because for a race that is that difficult, usually the timeline would be 36 hours in order to finish 100 miles. And I came through at like 35 hours at 103 with a ton of climbing. And so obviously it's not a great time, but considering I still had 100 miles to go and considering I'd never done 100 before this, I was ecstatic. I was super pumped about it. And yeah, I don't know. I think I lied to a lot of people going into the race because everybody would say like, "Oh, so you've run 100?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course." Because when I told people I didn't, they looked at me like I had a dick growing out of my forehead, and I was like, I hated trying to defend myself. I saw this race and I wanted to conquer it. I wanted to come back strong after that first 100 got me down, and I did look for some hundreds throughout the year, but I couldn't find anything that lined up with my schedule. So with work and everything, so it is what it is. I literally would just tell people like, "Oh yeah, I did that 100." Or whatever. Just I would not like lie about a certain race or a time or any bullshit like that. But it would be easier to not have to deal with people saying like, "Why the fuck would you go from 100K to 205 miles?" I know why. I can't necessarily explain it to you. So whatever. At that point, I was like, okay, I've done 100. I can tell people. And for the rest of the race, if people ask me like, "Oh, what hundreds did you do?" I was like, "Oh, I did the first 100 miles of the Tahoe 200 this year, just now when I finished back there." So kind of made it. Anyway, so that kind of became my story for the rest of the time. So for mile 103, I tried to sleep again. The problem at mile 103, I tried to sleep again. The problem at that point is that when I laid down, my lungs filled up with water. So this really sucked because I hadn't slept yet. I'd been through a full 24, 30 hours at this point, 35 hours, and I still hadn't slept, and now I can't sleep. Because one, we were kind of high. I think we were like 8,000 something feet. And every time I would lay down, my lungs would literally just fill with water. So I laid down. I couldn't breathe. It was like gargling. And I was like, I have to get the fuck out of here. So I did get a little time off my feet again, which I think helped. And then I got to pick up a pacer at mile 100 and went to 123. And that was extremely beneficial. I didn't realize at the time how important that would be. But going into the next night, which that was, and I think we left at midnight to 8 a.m., it was super important that I had somebody with me. And the reason is because I was so exhausted that I started to hallucinate on that trail. So from mile 103 to 123, the wheels fell the fuck off. It was a really hard leg for me. Not as hard as future legs, but at that point, it was definitely the hardest. I would forget what I was doing the whole entire time I was running. Like I would literally not know that I was in a race, or I kept thinking I was in a dream, and then I would like wake up and it was such a weird, like out of touch with reality type of feeling. I think from being so tired and from being so exhausted. And then of course, like you have all these electrolyte imbalances and things that are happening. And I had my poles in my hand, and I'd be running and using my poles, and I would forget what the fuck was in my hand. Like I would literally look at my hands and be like, "Oh, these are poles. I'm running right now." It was the weirdest thing. I also hallucinated and saw like a little baby deer. Not a baby, but like a full deer that was miniature size. And it would just hop and look at me and then hop more and look at me. And I also saw a full family with a tent and grills. And like they were like having breakfast in the morning around the fire. And then as I got up, I like looked and I was like, there was nothing there. It was just stumps and shit. And then what's another one? Oh, and then another one, I kept seeing dragon heads on the top of plants. And so when I would run, I would see them, and then I would get down like super close to look at them, and then realize like, oh, it's just a fucking plant. So that was most of the hallucinations that I had. And I think that was with the platypus. There was one time where I'm running, and I just see this platypus, and he just stands on the side of the rail, on the side of the trail, on his back feet, and he would just stand up and look at me as I went by. And I don't know, there was something comforting about having that platypus there, because he would jump up the trail and he'd be there again in like 100 feet. I enjoyed him, so it is what it is. Going into getting to mile 123 that morning, I ate a burrito, ate some breakfast, and I was like, I have to pass out. And thank God my crew, I literally had the best crew ever. They were taking care of me, like had food ready, pacing me when I needed it. Between my girlfriend and my two best friends, it was fucking phenomenal. And so they set up a tent for me, and so I crawled into that tent, and I literally just passed the fuck out because I was so tired. So for 45 minutes, I finally slept, and we were at a lower elevation, so my lungs were decently clear. I slept, but then the sun on the tent just like forced me to wake up, just covered in sweat, and that miserable feeling that you get every time you wake up when it's way too hot and you've been napping, and you're just disgusting. So whatever. So I got up, and then I headed down the trail again. There wasn't much to report on that second day, except essentially I was really just trying to keep moving. My lungs hurt, and I couldn't move fast still, so it was just kind of like just make progress every time. I knew my pace was way out the window, so every day I would just try to make progress and do the best that I could. And then trying to think. So then, as I went through the race, that day there really wasn't anything significant that day. And then going into the next night, that's when I decided I tried to sleep again before going into that next night, and I did get a little bit maybe. And then I got my next pacer, so I knew I cannot go into the night alone at this point because who knows where the fuck I'm going to end up. I would even forget that I was racing every single time. So this is where. My girlfriend, she decided, so she is afraid of running at night. Sorry, I got a little fucked up there trying to think of how this all went down. It was a long 4 days. My girlfriend decided that she would pace me that night because, or that afternoon, because it had a potential of going into night. And so I had a couple pretty fast legs because they were downhill that day. And then I had a 15-mile, at 5 o'clock, I had another 15 miles to go. And I can't remember, it was from mile 145 to 160, I think, something like that. And I looked, and I was like, 15 miles, and then I'll get to this next one at night. I'll get some more sleep. And I felt really good going into that aid station. And so I got there and actually beat my crew there because they were tracking me, and the tracker said I would get there at a certain time, but I ended up running a lot faster that leg. And so my girlfriend, she was like, "Oh, well, wait for us because I'm gonna be your date on this next leg." And I was like, "Oh, that's cool." And so I met a cool guy at that aid station. We ended up walking together for a little while. Me, him, and my girlfriend ended up staying together for the first 3 miles. And the first 3 miles were on the road, and we were making good progress. And I'm like, dude, 15 mile leg left, and then I get some sleep. This is going to be the easiest fucking 15 of my life. And at that point, you're at mile 145. And here's a dangerous thing. You start thinking, I've got this in the back because I've gone so far. Obviously, no one's going to quit at this point. Well, maybe. That's how I was thinking. But what you don't think about is the fact that you still have over 60 miles to go, which is a long fucking time. And before this, almost matched the longest I'd ever run in my life. So I was like, I fell into this trap of thinking I'm going to cruise through this 15 miles, get some sleep, wake up, another 50 the next day, and it's over. And that couldn't have been any further from the truth because at mile 3, we hit an incline that went straight up. And it was under these telephone poles. And they had mentioned it in passing at the race brief, but I didn't ever remember thinking it was going to be bad. And everyone I talked to had the exact same impression, thinking oh, this is whatever. And it was fucking awful. You could have fallen off of this incline. I had both poles, and every single step up felt like a max weight squat. Combined with the fact that we were at altitude, combined with the fact that I couldn't breathe, it was literally the worst part of my entire race. It took us all hours. We were literally moving at 0.4 miles an hour or something to get up this 5 or 6 mile climb that was just fucking straight up. And I remember at one point, because I was breathing so hard and getting such little oxygen to my brain, I looked over at Julie, my girlfriend. The lights flickered, and I just passed out. I went straight down into a bush. I remember the lights flickering, and then next thing I know, she's trying really hard to pull me out of a bush, and I have this stick straight into my thigh, and we got up, and I was scraped up and shit, and it was just God, this is awful. If having her with me at that moment was, I can't even describe how important it was, because if there was ever a time in the race where I fucking did not want to be out there anymore, it was at that moment. And I think that had to do with what I had expected to what it is. And that's a lot of times how the best way to deal with pain is to expect it to be a certain way and have that expectation be more than what it actually is. That works. But because I thought this was going to be such a fast leg, and because it was so fucking brutal, it really got me. And luckily I was doing it in the evening time, but not at dark. And if I'd had to do it at night, it would have been really, really fucking brutal, because it was through like a bunch of like pucker brush and stuff as well. Not the best path. One of the unsung heroes of this race is a guy that I saw cruise up this fucking thing smoking a joint. I'm going to say that again. One of the unsung heroes, one of the most studs among men that I've ever seen in my life, started at the bottom of this trail, the one that made me pass out with my poles, and just walked up it with no poles, smoking a joint. Just cruised up this bitch all the way to the top. Nothing. I haven't seen anything like it. Never saw him again in the race, but if you're watching this, you are a fucking animal. And I think the world should know about you. But anyway, because you were partaking in legal activities at the time, maybe I will not say what your name was. And anyway, so I get to the top of this, and we still have 6 more miles to go for that aid station. And then that night, this was actually the lowest I got throughout the whole race. I was so exhausted, I couldn't even respond. Julie would try to talk to me and keep me going, and I literally could not answer her. Like, I couldn't breathe. I just, one foot in front of the other, would fall over. I had to keep stopping, and it was hard to describe how brutal it was. But the hallucinations this night were like not as friendly. The platypus was there, which was super cool. I appreciated him being there. But I had this chick that kept jumping in the trail and like pulling one of these like Spider-Man stances. And so I would think she wanted to fight. So then I would stop real quick. And I didn't want to freak Julie out because she already didn't want to be in the woods at night. So I'd pretend that nothing was there, and I would just try to keep going, knowing in the back of my mind that I had to fight this girl. At least that's the narrative that I built up in my head. And the other thing I saw was people everywhere through the woods, like with headlamps on, just looking at us, like running beside us. And it was a weird thing. I tried not to let it slow me down, but I was going so goddamn slow that night that didn't really matter. By the time we did get to that aid station, the tent was set up. My buddy set up the tent, and I crawled right in there, and I fell asleep. Like, instantly, there was nothing to it. The people at that aid station were partying their ass off. Like, the aid workers, they were raging. They were, like, drinking and smoking and playing music, and it was cool, I think, for some of the runners that, like, needed a pump up. For me, trying to sleep, I felt like I was sleeping in the middle of fucking Burning Man, and it really sucked. But, you know, that happens, whatever. They're volunteers. And like I said, I think for a lot of people it was cool. For me, I was just so dead. I mean, I did get sleep, but I kept waking up to just raging. And so I got a couple hours, I think, an hour and a half, and then headed out that next night with my buddy. And that day was really slow. I think I messed up a little bit of this timeline, but it's basically how it worked. And that next day was really slow. I had originally wanted to finish on that third day, and with my pace I would have, but because of the breathing thing, and I had to slow down so bad that my pace fell off so hard that I was like looking at heading into the next night. And mentally that kind of hurt, because I was like, God, I do not want to spend another night out here, another night dealing with these fucking hallucinations, trying to decide whether I want to sleep, whether I want to fall down on the side of the trail and get like 15-minute dirt now, or what I wanted to do. So that definitely played going into the next day on me a little bit. But it is what it is, and I made pace as fast as I could, which was not great. But the good thing is my lungs started clearing up a little bit. And at that day, I realized, okay, if I go above 7,500 feet, lungs fill up instantly, breathing changes, gets really hard. But if I'm below, I actually can breathe okay and move okay. So that was a positive side of that. And the aid station I had to get to that day was at lake level, which is like 5,000 something feet. So that was actually perfect. And so I get to an aid station that day, and at this point I have 30 miles left in the race, but my pace was so slow that based on the pace I was going, I was not going to finish until the next morning. And I had till 1 p.m. the next day to finish. And so I was bummed about that, and I just kept thinking about it. I left that aid station during the day with no pacer. And as I'm walking, I'm just thinking about how pissed I am that I have to go into another night. And then I started thinking, like, well, you're not fucking hopeless in this. Like, you have a say. Like, if you run fast enough, you don't have to. And your lungs are kind of clear. Yeah, so stop being a bitch. That's what I told myself. And I I said, you know what, hell or high water, I'm charging this next 20-mile section. So I had a 20-mile section and a 10-mile section to go. The 20-mile section went all straight up to 10,000 feet for the first 10 miles, and the second 10 miles were back down. And so I just told myself, like, conquer this bitch. Make this hill your bitch. If any time you were ever going to go hard and make something your bitch, this is going to be the fucking time. And that's what I did. I went as absolute hard as I could, at a manageable pace, of course, but I moved up to like 4 miles an hour. For me at that time was fast. I passed a lot of people throughout that section, and I cruised up to 10,000 feet. And I got up there hours ahead of where even my goal was. And then hours ahead of that goal was even hours ahead of what I should have gotten up there. And I passed like 4 or 5 people, maybe even more on the way up. And it felt great. And I was hurting real bad, maybe 2 miles from the end. And I just kept pushing. It wound all the way up, and it was like almost a stone staircase with a waterfall on one side. One of the coolest places I've ever been. And honestly, the running in Tahoe is absolutely, every time you come up over a hill, it's like the most breathtaking view you've ever seen. I had a hard time appreciating those views after the first 30 miles, basically. I was kind of over it, but there's literally nowhere better that I would say that you could put a race as far as that goes. And one of the interesting things is people kept asking me, like, oh, did you take a picture? And I have this thing where I believe that there's like layers to this life. And here's what I mean by this. If you see a picture of a sunset, that gives you a feeling, especially if it's taken by a really good photographer. If they know how to take a good picture, and there's the lens setting and everything is right, you can see a picture of a sunset and you can feel a certain way. Now, if you that's layer one, right? That's how I believe. And then if you drive to that certain sunset and you pull over at a bluff and you get out and you get to see it for yourself, you're like, oh, that's level 2. You feel it more. You're in more connection with what's going on around you. It's going to be some hippy dippy shit, so hold on. It's going to get worse before it gets better. So you get out of your car and you see it and you're like, you know, at that moment, there's probably no picture that can make you feel the way that you feel right now, right? Unless you maybe look at a picture of the same thing and then think back. But it's that moment that you're in there, that you're looking at the sunset, that you know, like, a picture won't do this justice. That's layer 2. The third layer to this life, I think, is if you were to hike to that bluff, if you were to hike all day and you were to be spent and you were to be tired and you were to earn that view, and then you were to get to the top and take a minute and eat something and drink something and look out and see that exact same sunset, you're in layer 3. You feel it more. There's no picture and there's nothing that will ever take the place of that feeling of having earned that sunset. Now, the deeper you suffer for something beautiful, that's the deeper into this life I think you can get. And so when people would ask me if I would take pictures of these things, I couldn't, because I know that's as deep as you're ever going to get in this life. I got to be there. I got to feel it. There's no picture that's ever going to bring me back there. And the pictures are cool and the Instagram is cool, and I get that, and I'm super stoked for them to develop those pictures. So don't get me wrong, but as far as me trying to take a picture and recreate that moment, I know that I went as deep into life, and that can be anything. That's not just running. That's the birth of a child. If you suffer for something beautiful, you're going deeper into this life and you're feeling more. And I think those are the things that really make life worth living at the end of it all, right? Those experiences. There's no pictures. There's no amount of buying shit that's ever going to be able to replace that feeling of going layers deep into this life and feeling it. So that was really cool. I worked hard. I got up to mile I guess it was 185 at that point, up to 10,000 feet. And I got up there so early. I stopped. I looked out at the kind of the plains there, not the plains, but the valleys and the mountains. And I got a brownie. My buddy bought these brownies at a store that tasted homemade, and they were the best fucking brownies I've ever had in my life. I would go to Tahoe only for these brownies, for the record. So I stopped and I started eating brownies, and I just started thinking about how the hell I'm going to get down from here, because I just wrecked myself getting up. And anyone that's done a long race knows you fry your hamstrings and everything, and your calves and your whole posterior chain going up. Well, now you don't have those as reinforcements going down, so your quads and your knees start taking all of the beating. And then when your quads and your knees go, your feet especially slide to the front of your shoes, and you start like pounding your feet. And it felt like I had no toenails left at all. And I had some actually, but at that whole last day, I couldn't take my shoe off anymore because I knew if I got it off, I was going to have to cut my shoe in order to get back on. So one of the things they say for these races is you should always have shoes that are size too big, so when your feet swell, you can get them on. But I didn't, and I didn't want to buy an extra pair of $150 shoes, so I literally knew, like, oh, this is it. I just got to keep these things on from here on out, which in retrospect, good, bad decision, I don't really know. My feet were fucked after this, completely mangled, stress fractured, and missing a lot of skin. But at that moment, I really didn't think I had a choice. So I get to the top of this mountain, I start eating a brownie, and I start thinking about, like, man, you have less than a marathon to go, and this whole entire experience is over. And I was super stoked about my timing because I was like, oh, maybe I can finish fucking tonight or early in the morning. I made a lot of time back up, and I think I was right. I think my lungs actually did save a lot of my legs. And just as I was enjoying it, just as I was thinking this has been a great experience, a fucking thunderstorm rolls in. And I don't know if you've ever seen a thunderstorm at 10,000 feet, but when it rolls in, or 9,500 feet, but when it rolls in like a fucking hurricane. It felt like trees were going to get ripped out of the ground. Lightning is just cracking next to you, super loud. And and I'm on an exposed mountainside, right? And I'm at the highest point possible. And at that moment, I had to get my shit together and get the fuck down. So what I did is I literally stuffed everything in my bag, took my hiking poles, put them in my backpack, put my zip up on my jacket, put my hood on, headlamp over my hood for when it got dark because I knew I didn't want to stop again. And I just sprinted to the bottom of that mountain. And it was like a nod from the universe. Like, I was sitting there thinking, like, God, I made up all this time, but I'm hurting and I don't know how long it's going to take me to get down. And that thunderstorm rolled in, and it was the most motivation that you could ever imagine to get the fuck off of the side of a mountain. One thing that happened, which I debated whether I wanted to talk about, is I had to take a dump on the way down. And so, like, half a mile in, it seemed like the storm might miss us. And so I stopped, and I started to go to the bathroom on the way off the side of the trail, 250 feet off the side, like they told us to, while burying it. And man, that storm picked up, and I'm on the side of an exposed mountainside trying to do my business while Zeus is just fucking throwing lightning bolts at me, just trying to fuck me up. So I literally just had an experience there that I don't think many people will get to have in their life, good or bad or indifferent. So then I did my business, buried my shit, literally, and then I sprinted to the bottom of that mountain fast. Like, it started getting dark toward the bottom, but again, I took that nod from the universe. I made up so much time, and I was just so pumped. And then it got down to the road, and I had like a 3.8 mile road stretch or something until the last aid station. So I put on some good music on my phone, and drank a Red Bull, and just kept a good pace throughout that road, and just knowing, like, one aid station and this whole fucking thing is over. So that was a really just great leg for me, the best leg of the whole entire race. Now, I knew my girlfriend was going to pace me for the last aid station, so that was good. Here's where I made the exact same mistake I made earlier, thinking I had it in the bag. So with a 205-mile race, it's never in the bag, right? Like, 1 mile can last for fucking ever, especially in the mountains. So you should never get in that mindset of thinking you got it in the bag. And then this is good for not just running, but life in general. If you're going to try to do really hard things that are, epic or big or bigger than what you've done in the past, it's going to cause you to have to level up in order to get there. For this race, I had to level up multiple layers. So at no point should you ever think like, oh, I'm leveled up high enough, because something this difficult will always show you there's a fucking level you're not at yet. And I got to feel it again. One of the cool things that happened is going into this last aid station, I met up with the people that I had stayed with for the first 62 miles. The guy from England who worked in oil, and the girl that was a charity worker who had done all these other hundreds. And I just thought that was such a cool moment, because we kept seeing each other all race. We kept passing each other, seeing each other at aid stations, checking in. And because we had that first night together where we learned so much about each other, it was just a really cool thing to see, like, everybody's still in it. And I think there were some times where they were thinking, I might not be in it, especially when the lady, Patty, had passed me at one point and noticed my lungs. And she was like, oh, you'll be okay, but you need to sleep at a lower altitude and whatever, because she had dealt with it, because she had so much experience. So it was really cool because we all met up again, and then I'd fallen off so hard because of that I got quite far behind them. But then I hit that second to last leg so hard. We all caught up, and we had hot chocolate, and we all talked, and then Dave, the guy, was like, why don't we all finish together? That would be an amazing experience. Like, such a good way to end this whole thing. And everybody was like, couldn't agree more. One, we were going tonight. It'd be really cool to just do the last leg together again. And then to finish this thing that, everybody has suffered so hard for. And then somehow, because over 200 miles, over 100 hours, people finished, days apart, literally. And so for us to get to this last aid station and have the last 10 miles to do together was like, it was the most poetic thing it could have been. So we were like, yeah, let's fucking do it. At least that was my attitude. I was hurting bad. I told him, like, hey, if I don't want you to slow you down, because I just went hard and now I'm done. But everybody was hurting, and they were super cool about it. And they were like, no, we'll get through this together. Going into that final 10-mile leg, there was a climb, again, that got you to the top of the very first climb, so like 9,000 feet. But I thought, man, 10 miles, I could do this with my eyes closed. Not true at all. My eyes basically were closed because it was pitch dark, but the light that I had was from the fucking lightning storm that had rolled back in. So we thought that all of the storms were over. The guy at the aid station was like, oh yeah, dude, it couldn't be a clearer night. Like, you guys got smooth sailing the rest of the way. And we were like, great. Not true at all. Half mile from the top, thunderstorm rolls in. And one of the other pacers that was pacing one of the other guys was like, hey, like, we need to get the fuck off of the summit of this mountain, because we basically came up to a big ridge line. And, everybody's ridge line with fucking metal poles in their hand, or carbon fiber, but they got poles in their hand. And we're literally at the highest point around, completely exposed, no trees, no nothing. So we got up there, and I know this is where I realized, like, how much of a hidden badass my girlfriend is, because she's afraid of heights, she's afraid of bluffs, she's afraid of the night, and she literally didn't say a thing. She just pushed the fuck through it, like, faced all of her fears and just went through. I was too tired to be scared, literally, and I thought it was kind of cool because I kept seeing, like, all the different hikers get lit up by the lightning. Like, as a flash would happen, you just see this really cool scene of people just trekking up this mountain, getting lit up. And I was in a weird headspace where I thought that was a cool thing. But this climb lasted so much longer than I thought it would, and that's kind of like how this goes. Like, at the end, miles that you think would be over way sooner, just they end up lasting a really long time. But we ended up getting through it, and it was pretty good. We ended up getting through that first climb and then moved downhill, and all the pacers decided they would go ahead, and that way they could take pictures as we came to the finish line. All of us that were together, there was like 5 of us on that, decided to link arms and go through the finish line together. And, the vain part of me was like, oh, I really want a picture of me, like, running through that finish line. And the reality is I wouldn't have been running with any kind of good stride. The picture would have looked like shit anyway. And it was 1,000 times cooler than I could have described it, because I finished with all of these people that I had started with, and that was just such a cool experience. And the connectedness you feel is just really cool, and it's something that would be really hard to recreate in any other situation. So that was awesome. We crossed the finish line just before 3 a.m. on Tuesday. I think it was like 2:57, and we all hugged. And then I was so tired at that point that I'd slept, I think maybe 2 hours and 40 minutes the whole entire time. I was exhausted, and I don't even know if I slept that much really in total. And then I grabbed a burrito and then went home. And when I got home, the real fun started, because then I got to take my shoes off for the first time in a long time, see how disgusting they were. And then I also got to try to take a shower with all of the exposed skin that I had that was missing. So I had some pretty good chafing, not as bad as other races. I think my rib was kind of bruised because I was trying so hard to get oxygen that my rib cage just kept expanding and contracting in such a fast and like violent manner that I think I like kind of bruised one of my ribs. My lips were all cracked, which was super minor. The big thing was my feet, some stress fractures in my feet, and just more missing skin than you could imagine. But all in all, it went really well. And then that night, I think I went up to bed, got like 6 hours of sleep, and I ended up spending the next day kind of crawling around the house because I couldn't do much else. I bought some Hoka recovery sandals that seemed to work, or my buddy bought them for me, seemed to work really well. And now I'm in this mode where I'm literally going to eat everything I possibly can, everything in sight. And I don't know. I got to figure out what I'm going to do next. I've thought about this a lot. So this race, I decided I would put toward a charity, and I decided to raise money for the Heroes Project. What they do is they raise money to help injured vets summit Everest. And being a veteran myself, I have a lot of probably unpopular beliefs about different veteran charities. I think a lot of them are bullshit. I think a lot of them do a good job. I think maybe some of them are even well-intentioned, but I don't think that they all hit the mark. Because what happens with veterans is that they get, especially when they're injured, they get everything that they loved in life taken away from them. And what they have is their identity, right? Veterans are physical people, and we are people that tend to be okay with embracing risk, right? That you don't sign up in the middle of a wartime in any other scenario if you're not at least a little bit okay with embracing risk. So the fact that that gets overlooked kind of bums me out. What the Heroes Project does is they take people and they say, like, straight up, we're going to put you back in harm's way. And that gives veterans a lot of purpose. And so I was super fucking pumped to be a part of that charity and to help raise some money for them. So all in all, we didn't raise a ton of money, but we raised just under $3,000 for the Heroes Project, which made me insanely happy. I was so stoked about it. And stoked to be part of something so great. Going forward, now that I've done the 200-mile run, I don't know what I want to do next. Maybe 100, but I got to figure it out. You know, I'm thinking about maybe an Ironman, but the thing is, this has been my goal for the last year. So now that it's done, it's kind of like that moment where you reflect and you think, like, what do I want? Do I want to do that again? Nah, not fucking really. It was a long time to suffer. After the first 100 miles, I mean, it's such a long time to push pain away. Sometimes I would push the pain away for so long that I would get, it would all come rushing back at once. Sometimes it was like not phantom, but like these random pains that would like just shoot up my leg, and I would be like, oh fuck. But I would just keep pushing the pain off, keep pushing off in my mind, trying to push it off for real with Advil, which is obviously not super great for you. But then all the pain sometimes would come rushing back at once, and it just felt like you're in an engine room and fucking alarms are going off everywhere. And I just bells and whistles and ears are ringing, and it's just such a long time to put all of that off that I just don't know. I think it's an experience that I'm so happy that I got, and I hope that other people do it. And the thing about ultramarathon running is literally anybody can do it. You know, you might not have the will or the want or the desire to do it, but you absolutely have the ability to do it. You have the ability to continue to move forward. And that's something, you know, I found out because my physical body tapped out pretty fucking early. I mean, like within 70, 90 miles, my physical body was kind of like, we're done here. So figure out a new sport. But I continued, to the mile 205. And so that's just a huge lesson. But getting back to it, I don't know if I want to do another one exactly like that. I'm sure as soon as I can walk again, that's exactly what I'm going to want to do. I can already kind of feel some ambition creeping in. But for right now, I'm super happy to eat all of the junk food that we've made on this earth, especially ice cream and pizza. I might even dip pizza in ice cream so I can get it done faster and figure out what the next move is going to be. I will say, though, I think that everything I do from here on out will have that charity aspect because not just because I have these like altruistic notions, but because it actually made me a better person. It made me a better athlete. It made me push harder. There was no way I was going to take $3,000 from my friends and family and then fucking quit. There's no fucking way that was going to happen. So having that aspect, it literally made me a better human and it made me a better athlete. And I think everything that I do from here on out will definitely have that charitable aspect to it. And kind of remains to be seen what that is. But for now, I hope you guys enjoyed this rendition of the Tahoe 200 from my perspective, which was kind of wild. If I end up with a tattoo of a platypus somewhere, you're going to know why. And thanks for checking this out. Yeah, that's all I got. Have a good night. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Lionheart Radio. I hope that the information from today's show will make you fitter, happier, and healthier. For the show notes of this episode and every episode, head to www.lionheartrad.io. Yep, just like Lionheart Radio. And please, if you have the time, head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating. It really helps